We'll start sharp at 3 p.m. Paritosh ji,
Sure.
not able to.
You're able to hear me, right?
Yeah. We'll
Okay.
start at 3 p.m., sir.
Sure. Okay.
Good afternoon to all. Welcome to the IBA webinar on operational resiliency in information technology. Amid evolving customer expectations, easing legacy systems, and increased regulatory scrutiny, banks are under constant pressure to enhance their IT operational resilience while addressing deeper, often unexamined challenges within their technology landscape. Today's session covers insights on the challenges which banks face, typical hotspots, and the strategies and approaches which one can take to address operational resiliency. The topic is presented by Shri Paritosh, Managing Director in Accenture Financial Services. Paritosh is the lead for technology architecture and platform engineering practice. He has been guiding banks and financial institutions address complex technology problems and build scalable and resilient architecture. He has over 25 years of IT experience in digital transformation, architecture transformation, platform engineering, technology architecture consulting, practitioner-led approach. Paritosh also leads the Gen AI technology engineering capability for India. The webinar duration is 30 minutes. 30 means 1 hour, 30 minutes for the presentation by Paritosh ji. Then next 30 minutes for question and answers. I request participants to write questions in the chat box so that once the presentation is over, the questions will be answered. Over to you, sir, Paritosh ji.
Thank you, Srinivas ji. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome for the session on the operational resilience in information technology. In a country like India, typically, when we are talking about a kind of a scale today in terms of the growing business needs that the banks are facing today, where we are witnessing a huge exponential growth in terms of the UPI transactions, digital payments, the online business, need for fast tracking the online business in terms of loan applications, etc. In addition, with open banking challenges, the third-party APIs, ecosystem integrations, and over the period, banks today in India have grown over a period of time. Systems have grown. Some of the core systems of the banks have become fat, what they term as kind of a legacy with time, especially on the core banking side, loan management systems, etc. Now, if we compare banks to other industries, banks have quite a heterogeneous technology landscape. Predominantly at the core, they have various COTS products. They have multiple vendors. When you talk of the middleware channel systems, that is where some of the banks have embarked on the modern engineering initiatives, modernization initiatives. In addition, some of the banks have also adopted clouds, and not just one, multiple clouds as well. So it's like a hybrid environment in which they are operating on. They have some estate which is lying on the cloud. They have some estate within the on-premise data centers. And this over a period has resulted in a lot of complexities. Now, given today where we are, there is also banks and the financial institutions. They are also under constant threats of the security breaches, the ransomware attacks, insider attacks. I mean, there is always a constant pressure which is on the bank's IT infrastructure. And banks' technology landscape is therefore facing challenges with respect to the IT resiliency, ability to meet the IT service levels, the kind of transparency in the operations which is required across various legs of the transaction. And again, ability to recover from these failures. And therefore, this IT operational resiliency has become a very important topic. Now, given that industry, and if you see the right side of the slide, and given that the industry has witnessed various kind of outages, breach of data security, the question that needs to be asked by the banks is, are we really ensuring customer trust? And are we in a true sense resilient? And this brings to an interesting point on what do we really mean by the IT operational resiliency. Now, resiliency, if you look at in very simple words, is continue to carry out its mission critical tasks even in the face of adversity. If you look at a practitioner's lens, the definition becomes how quickly the system can respond and recover from a failure. And that too within the defined SLAs which the bank has signed up with its customers as a level of trust. Now, typically what we have also witnessed in the banking today, there are applications, as I said, that's a heterogeneous landscape. There are vendors, there are application owners. Now, for application owners, the application owner might be saying that, okay, hey, I'm monitoring all my applications. I have got my uptime SLA. I have put certain levels of observability controls in. I do regular drills, capacity check, and whatnot. But still, fundamentally, a question is, okay, I still face certain challenges when it comes to meeting the resiliency IT service levels. There are technical declines, there could be failures, and I really don't know where is the problem then. And that brings to a fact that if we dissect any kind of a banking landscape or a technology infrastructure, what we have is largely any processes. It cuts across predominantly three different layers. You have the digital channels, APIs, which is your customer touch points, your ecosystem partners who are integrating with you. You have got the service middleware, wherein you have either in terms of the business services, the microservices, enterprise integration services, talking to various systems within the bank. And the last layer is your core banking system, loan application, etc. Now, why do problems usually happen? And that is where it could be because of your concurrency, surges, peaks. I mean, marketing would always like to drive the campaigns. It could be festive seasons, offers, etc. There could be various exception scenarios which could happen within your system because things do keep changing. It is not a static view or shot. It is like a dynamic snapshot. Things keep changing. There could be potential surges in the transactions and therefore resulting into certain failures. Also about regulatory changes. These do not come in a, whilst you have got various systems and applications running your infrastructure, but regulatory is something which dictates certain compliances in terms of what your systems need to be, what they need to do in terms of regulatory, what needs to be the adherence paradigms, etc. And lastly, the underlying insight tech failure. And anything could result in failures because any of these parameters change your underlying application, the kind of performance, scale, efficiencies, infrastructure, it impacts all these things. Now the question here is, and this is a very familiar diagram to all the bankers. Typically, if you look at any kind of a UPI infrastructure, as I said, I mean, it is not just an application in silo. I might be running everything for that application. I'll be doing all the drills, all the compliance checks, everything. But then end of the day, it is the process which cuts across various layers of application. Typically, if you talk of UPI, I mean, it's like a four-party entity. Everyone is aware of it. You have the payer, you have the payee, PSP, you have got the remitter bank, you have got the beneficiary bank, and you have also got the switch, which is sitting on at the right side, which is NPCI switch. Your transactions basically cut across various layers till it reaches the switch backbone coming back from the other banks and then having those credit debit operations. Now, if you look at this architecture, if we slightly go into each of the layers, now there could be multiple areas or multiple points, or what I've typically called as hotspots. There could be a surge in demand, and UPI, I mean, everyone is aware of it, everyone industry is a witness of it. There could be certain cyber security related failures, there could be potential vulnerabilities in your application, etc., etc. There could be the transaction traffic which is hitting across your load balancers, your gateways, and therefore intersecting your underlying infrastructure. There could be connectivity issues with your database, the kind of oracles of the world, the rack, how you have configured, or the kind of nodes which you have configured underneath, the kind of availability controls which you have put in. I mean, each of these legs, if you look at it, there could be certain potential hotspots. Now, these hotspots could be, as I said in the previous slide or the chart, it could be either because of certain patches which are getting applied, because of certain regulatory compliance or your OEM upgrades. It could be because of certain exception scenarios which are happening and things are not dealt properly or not handling of the proper error codes, and therefore things could probably fall through the cracks. It could be because of the surges or the sudden spikes, maybe because of festive seasons, etc. I mean, there could be chokes because of the external or the internal factors. And if you see, these hotspots can be at each and every layer. These hotspots emerge, and therefore the architecture has to be predominantly resilient enough to handle these kind of failures and also recover from these failures. And this is not just for the COTS applications like your UPIs, your core banking of the world, but even if we look at modern engineered applications, now that is where also the modern engineering applications, they require a kind of a discipline. They require a kind of an engineering approach, which needs to be ensured like a well-engineered approach, taking into account various resiliency tests, the kind of coding practices and the hygiene you need to bring about, what kind of enforcements you have done on the APIs which are exposed either to the channels, to the partners, what kind of practices you have put in place in terms of the testing, and the kind of overall the discipline, what I typically call as the engineering 101. Now, you put the architecture in place even for modern engineering. Typically, what you need to take care is the kind of a day zero patching, whether my architecture is able to take care of that. Tomorrow, if a vulnerability comes in, how quickly I'm able to ensure that I'm able to apply this particular patch across the relevant components without affecting downtime. If you are talking about some of the banks, they're already adopting a kind of a 99.99, a kind of a RPO and moving towards RPO 0. These are the kind of SLAs which are being targeted. And therefore, if you look at the flip side of it, it's like a practically always on system. And these kind of, say, a simple example like a day zero patching, if you do it the incorrect way, it could bring down and compromise your SLA straight away. And therefore, if you look at a modern engineered application, if you do a dissection across the various layers, you will see hotspots emerging. It could be either because of you may have not done the enforcement of trust, security, or TLS standards. As simple as pagination, you have not enforced the right way of how the pagination needs to take care. Exception handling, improper handling of sessions. We may have put the best controls in place from the load balancing standpoint. But hey, I have not taken care of my session handling a proper way, and it is leading to a sticky sessions, and therefore my traffic is always going to one of the load balancers and not the other one, even though I've put it in a high available redundant fashion. Lack of automation. I mean, these are the typical things. Typically, when you talk of well-engineered applications, you need to take care of these considerations. One of the important aspects, and last year, the end of last year, when regulatory entity, they have issued even a circular on the SBOM visibility. Now, all these have to be taken care as a part of the software BOM, and a typical example which I faced during audits as a practitioner. A regulatory entity could come to you asking a very simple example. Hey, there is a Log4j. Can you tell me whether your real estate uses Log4j? If yes, what is the version of Log4j which is being used? If I have the answer to it, they may ask which environment it is deployed in. Okay, what kind of CVE vulnerability it is sitting on. I mean, those are the kind of, when was the last patching done? Is it in an end of life fashion? And if I don't have systemic answers to this, I think that is where the banks could get into a problem with when we face these kind of regulatory audits. So now you can understand, one is the whether it's we are talking about the traditional COTS legacy application or whether we are moving into a modern engineered applications. Hotspots can emerge everywhere if things are not taken care from the right architectural considerations, if you have not looked at various parameters, considerations when you're designing well-architected frameworks. Now, here is where I think all CXOs, I mean, they need to ask themselves and their organizations a question. Typically, for example, does your organization really have a well-defined operational resilience framework? How the resilience is built or integrated into your business continuity planning? Kind of, is your bank equipped enough in a kind of ransomware kind of scenario? How to take care of those? What kind of attacks? And so on and so forth. There could be many such, but these are the kind of top 8 to 10 questions which every CIO, CISO, CDO, they need to ask their organizations and the members below in their teams. If you just take a simple example, even of a ransomware attack, and this is a very kind of a example which would resonate in today's world. In case of a ransomware, if it hits your critical systems, how quickly you are able to have a minimal functional readiness, how quickly you can go to that path. If you go to that path, what is the kind of good copy and how old that good copy is in terms of your RPO, RTO considerations? Would you be able to recover the last leg of transactions if in case the bank is under the ransomware attack? You have a good copy, but it could be a X hours old. Now, what do I need to do? I mean, is there a way by which I can reconcile the data? There are regulatory entities, there are answers, there are solutions, but to implement it and stitch it together in the right manner, that is where the real operational resiliency matters and how good your architecture is able to take care of these. Because if you go to the third-party entities for recovering the last data, you have different partners. For example, if you look at UPI, you look at IMPS, NEFT, and so on and so forth. The partners keep changing. In some cases, it could be NPCI. In some cases, it could be RBI. In some cases, it could be some others. And therefore, recovering these so that your organization remains resilient is of prime importance. Therefore, if we start looking at applying the operational resiliency, one of the important aspects, and it is again a function of, as I said, performance scalability, security, reliability, overall operational excellence in terms of automation, the kind of observability you have built, not just for your application, but across your process intersecting various applications, the kind of GRC controls which are being enforced as a part of bank. And therefore, if you typically look at the operational resiliency lifecycle, it cuts across primarily, if you look at process is one angle, you have got people, which is the other angle, and you've got technology, and cutting across these different lines of defense. Now, that is where typically a governance needs to be imposed. Now, we need to ask ourselves typically, and again, this could be a question to the CIOs, CISOs, and other, how well established is the architecture review boards? I myself have been a member of architecture review board for some of the leading banks in India. This is a very important, and nowadays it is not a kind of a nice to have, but it is like a mandated practice which is dictated. In fact, the regulatory entity also asks this, how well your ARB is in place, how well your change control board is in place. What are the aspects you typically look at it? Having run the architecture review board myself, I know the kind of exhaustive checklist, almost like 23 odd different checklists covering various areas, including your parts of automation, how you are dealing with, not to mention of the SBOM, which I just spoke about a few minutes back. I mean, all these things need to be considered as a part when you are designing your architecture. Again, the kind of what kind of shift left controls you have from a security perspective, how quickly you are able to identify your threat modeling scenarios And therefore, have you taken those into consideration in your design? I think these are some of the questions which the banks need to answer, and therefore the practices and governance like the ARB body, CCB are of prime importance. If we look at people, a classic example which I gave in the previous chart, the ransomware, you cannot have the same staff or the people who are looking at your BAU operations, your run the bank. The same staff cannot be there for in case of these kind of attacks which happen as a part of malware. You need to, is your organization prepared for a separate IT operating model to take care of these kind of scenarios? Do you have a separate team who can get into action in these kind of scenarios? And of course, the last leg being tools and technologies. What is the level of automation? What is the depth of automation? Are we really doing the resiliency engineering tests for the critical application? To what extent? How are we doing? And these are some of the questions we need to ask and therefore find the right answers in order to certify the applications whether they are meeting these kind of operational resiliency. If you ask me, as a part of organization like Accenture, I mean, we have been doing these practices day in, day out, running ARBs for large banks, running transformation initiatives, run the banks. And let me tell you, run the bank today is not just a typical commoditized service, which was there a few years back. Today, as I said, anything can go wrong. I mean, and who suffers end of the day? It is not the regulator, it is not the bank. At the end of the day, it is the customer who is suffering. It's the breaching of trust what we are doing with the customer. And therefore, the kind of controls which we need to put forth need to be well established. Now, if you look at a practitioner's approach, we need to have a comprehensive, and that's what is depicted in this chart, kind of a 5-step approach, wherein you look at your architecturally significant use cases. And when I say use cases, it could be a process which is intersecting various legs of application or across applications, traversing through your estate underneath, which could be infrastructure, which again could be containerless workloads across the moving parts where the process flows, till it hits the last mile, which is the core banking system. Now, in doing so, if you start dissecting your process, it primarily falls to the comprehensive tech diagnosis in terms of the kind of application tech reviews, the kind of EIS or integration touch points where your process touches your various layers as it traverses, what kind of internal applications and external applications or vendors that particular process talks to, and therefore are those flows taken into account, and where the hotspots could emerge. The complete cloud infrastructure, and as I said, today it's a complex world, being heterogeneous, multi-cloud, on-prem estate, some estate on cloud, things are even more complex. And therefore, to add on complexity, there could be both container and containerless workloads, and therefore it adds to its own problems. With the Gen AI coming into effect, I mean, the GPUs are also getting added now. I mean, it's both, it could be either on-prem, where the banks are investing on, or it could be even Azure GPTs of the world, where you are accessing public cloud. And therefore, you need to cut across your process, across key dimensions of stability, resiliency, scale, control, governance, how equipped you are, and therefore, how are you able to solve these problems as a part of operational resilience. Identification of these choke points, and then identification of what could be the remediation interventions in terms of, it could be a short-term controls, it could be a measures which need to be put in place as a part of mid-term and long-term strategy. And of course, there could be hundreds of things which the organization need to cater to. The right prioritization in terms of what these tech transformation initiatives typically would demand, and what kind of operational resiliency controls you need to put in place. And then ongoing tech governance. As I said, it is not just a one-time exercise. There are, I've seen banks doing a one-time kind of a diagnosis, but let me tell you, in today's world, as I said, RTB is just not a commoditized stuff. Things are changing. There is dynamicity in the landscape. There are transformational initiatives, modern engineering applications, modernizations happening in the bank in parallel. And therefore, this kind of ongoing tech governance from a sustainability and assurance is a must. And lastly, I would just say, I think predominantly, if you look at some of the key takeaways, operational resiliency is today I would not put in as a technology process or just a process or something very siloed. It has to be a cultural change within the organization. It is an investment not done only for a regulatory compliance or for IT systems to work, but it is, as I said, building trust with the customer end of the day. Define a robust framework. You need to ensure that all the operational resilience scenarios are taken care in your design, architectural practices, and it has to be thought through right at the start. You have to use a practitioner-led, and this is very, very important. It is not a theoretical paper exercise. As I said, the system's getting complex across talking to various environments. A practitioner-led approach is a must in order to design, implement, assess, and ensure that it is relevant over a period of time. A holistic approach needs to be taken. And this is very, very important when you talk of holistic approach, because you need to take into consideration some of the non-functional requirements which are sitting today across applications. Are they really relevant? If one change which you do in an application, how it affects the other moving parts of another application. Are those NFRs baseline? They might have been baselined 2 years back, but today, because of aging, something has happened, and therefore you need to relook, re-baseline those non-functional requirements in terms of TPS, throughputs, etc. And therefore, a holistic approach is a must. And lastly, as I said, it's not just a one-time exercise, it's a continuous improvement exercise, which banks need to adopt. They need to ensure they need to bring that kind of a rigor in terms of the operational resilience governance and putting the right set of processes, tools, and practices. With this, I would just end my presentation and open up the session for questions. I'll just stop sharing my screen so that I'm able to look at the questions.
Paritosh, I request attendees to pose questions on chat. They can write questions.
Yeah, so I can see some of the questions flowing. So what are the key indicators? I think someone has asked about the key indicators of a matured BFSI organization. Now, if you look at the operational resiliency, it takes into account some of the key leading and lagging KPIs. You need to have these in place. For example, if you take a very simple example in terms of the SBOM, and because this is a word of the hour wherein regulatory entities and various organizations using this particular keyword. So, do you have a SBOM? Is it coming out of the system? This could be the one of the KPIs. Because no longer people are depending on Excels because they could be out of date, they could be incorrect. Are they systemically generated is the question. And that is one KPI for the organization. Some of the metrics to it would be, as I said, when was the last patching done? How many libraries have got a CV errors which are more than say 8.5 or 9? Which environment are they lying in? When was the last patching done? What is the kind of EOL particular library carries? These are the kind of metrics which are required to fulfill the KPIs on the SBOM. And these are need-based. And so on and so forth. I mean, if you look at the kind of BCPs, there could be another KPI in terms of how well the integration level of resilience measures in your BCP plans. Metric could be a number of BCPs that have been updated to include some of the resilience controls and strategies which you have worked upon. So these could be some of the examples. There is a laundry list, of course, as a part of more and more questions which you ask, which I showed on one of the charts on the top 8 to 10 questions. I mean, each of those questions has certain leading, lagging KPIs and metrics. And I would suggest that, yes, for a mature BFSI organization, we need to ask these questions so that these KPIs, metrics can be identified and the organizations can work towards it for doing or becoming more and more mature. As it's not a static snapshot, you need to continuously move because of the dynamicities the banking industry carries. I can see a question on CBOM. Do we really need to work on CBOM or can we focus on SBOM? A very good question. In fact, I, as a practitioner, and Karun, who is also one of my presenters who is on the screen, we have been faced this question by one of the banks. SBOM, yes, it is the necessity and need. There have been clear controls and circulars which have been circulated by RBI end of last year, wherein what fields need to be captured. There are almost like around 22 odd fields, what typically a regulatory entity dictates on SBOM. So if you ask me SBOM, it is mandatory. CBOM is where I think the awareness is now at least start being initiated. And there are certain questions which are asked on CBOM as well by banks and organizations. But if you ask me today, SBOM is a prime focus. It is mandatory. It needs to be, at least for the new applications which are being there, and slowly the applications which are already live can move to adopt the SBOM. CBOM is something which is recently being looked at, and these awareness questions have been started from regulatory entity. Primarily a kind of catalog of, do you have a catalog of all the cryptographic practices? How are you maintaining the keys? All these, are they properly cataloged with the right role-based access controls in place? Those are some of the areas or questions which the organization needs to be ready whenever they are embarking on these kind of modern application journeys or any bespoke developments or new applications which are going live. There's a question on cyber vaulting. How do you typically assess cyber vaulting as part of maintaining your overall resilience scenarios for critical bank applications? This is also an upcoming niche area, I would say. And I would slightly put in a more complexity here. It is not just a cyber vaulting. Cyber vaulting, I think the one aspect is, of course, on the tool technology, how you do it for your critical applications in terms of the data, good copy, etc. The bigger question which needs to be answered here is the end-to-end process, right from your application, how it moves the data across from your DCDR to the third cloud where you have reinstated your cyber vaulting operations, how the data is flowing through the cyber vault, what kind of good copy you have across the applications, how old it is, what are the kind of reconciliation practices for recovering the last mile of data. Those are some of the questions which need to be answered as a part of the operational resilience process flow. So I would say, as I said, it is always process, people, and technology. So it is not just, but yes, this is an important subject. And there, at least I've been seeing recent RFPs which have been also floated by some of the banks in this area of the ransomware protection, the cyber vaulting, etc. There is a question which I see on the framework implemented at the customer side, the success ratio as a part of it. See, the framework is a starting point, I would say. You need to have first station. I mean, if you ask me today whether banks are actually having a framework which is led as a practitioner approach, most of the banks would say the answer is no. There could be theoretical stuff, there could be paper which could be written in terms of the process policies. But I think here the main is the kind of the framework has to be there at the customer side. What is the success ratio? The question needs to be answered in terms of the KPIs and metrics you are able to fulfill. Your framework could have 10 different areas which are identified as a part of your resiliency framework. The key question which needs to be answered is the success ratio depends on what are those KPIs and how are you fulfilling those metrics? And do we have those metrics as a part of the evidences which we are accumulating? As I said, this is not a exercise which is done post any incident or failure. It is more of a proactive exercise. So right now, the dependence or the success ratio depends on the KPIs and the metrics, and the kind of controls which you put in place, and therefore what kind of resilience engineering outputs which you have in terms of ensuring that your organization is resilient enough, or your critical application is resilient enough on the customer side.
Paritosh, if I might add something,
Please.
so just like we have this cyber resilience framework or cyber security framework, in Europe we have this DORA, Digital Operational Resilience Framework, because that's been already mandated. Currently, RBI has come out with certain guidelines to enable operational risk and operational resilience, but in few months down the line, you will have a framework which would be in similar lines, and that needs to be adopted.
Yeah, I think well put, Karun. I think I'll also take the question. I think there has been an interesting question which I see on the certain guidelines and how much relevance it has to the operational resiliency. Very good question. As I said, the recent SBOM, CBOM related questions with the regulatory entity has been asking. They are primarily driven from the certain guidelines. Now, this certain guidelines is used as a kind of a reference or a guideline which ensures a secure practices across the complete application development lifecycle, right from the design, the threat modeling, what kind of flows which you're thinking in putting these kind of robust architectures designs in place, to the kind of security controls, what kind of controls you have from automation in terms of DevSecOps, SASDAST, SBOM generation through systemic controls, all those come into it. And moving to operations, talking about patching, day zero patching, the kind of vulnerability monitoring, and how you need to measure those across through a systemic way, and how quickly you are able to patch your environments through the in case if there is a high vulnerability coming in, or if RE informs of a particular vulnerability which needs to be fixed as a part of the day zero operations. So all those are typically covered as a part of the certain guidelines. This is new arena. People might be doing it in either through a manual nature or in bits and pockets here and there. But now I think with these guidelines coming up, what the REs are looking is, and the regulators, what they're looking is how you are able to establish automation across the full life cycle when you talk of application security development practices. There is one question which I see from Nirmal from HDFC Bank. So apart from uptime, what are the resilience measures? If you ask me, there are many. I mean, if you just look at those top 10 questions which you see, those will have the resiliency KPIs and therefore the metrics. But just to give you a classical example, I mean, many of the banks are embarking on modern application modernization journeys, either developing new applications bespoke using modern engineered practices, or modernization wherein they're moving their application workloads to containers, etc. Now, a classic question, or one of the important resiliency measures which are typically tracked, which need to be tracked, I would say, in terms of is, I mean, most of the banks are adopting Kubernetes as a part of their modernization from a scale to handle the scale perspective, in terms of how quickly you can recover from failures, auto heal mechanisms, etc. But if you look at Kubernetes as a one small technology, there are various metrics and resiliency measures which you need to capture. As simple as one, if I want to say, a configuration drift. Now, this is a very typical problem which most of the banks or organizations are facing, wherein, say, for example, there are banks who are taking steps towards Terraform IAC automation. One is you have a scripted approach. But if suddenly something comes up and a manual intervention is put into place, you deviate from your Terraform IAC, you have to, again, your script will not work because you have put a manual measure in one, because you have resorted to a manual fix or a patch, and therefore there is a configuration drift. If you talk of, say, auto scaling in terms of Kubernetes, again, a classic example, you must have defined something as a part of your manifest. But if there are also ways and mechanisms to do manually through consoles, etc., if you resort to those, there is unexpected behavior which could occur, and therefore, again, leading to a configuration drift. If you look at DevSecOps, you have CI/CD pipelines which are codified as a part of your Jenkins jobs. There are also ways why you can use manual tweaks, wherein you can go directly to your Jenkins UI, decide what to do with the deployment, etc. You can change it. What the result is? Unexpected behaviors, because now you have done a configuration drift. So there are multiple such examples, multiple KPIs, and therefore metrics which you need to measure for any kind of application when you are talking about the operational resilience stuff. You want to take a question on the air gap solution? There is a question on how to implement a air gap solution.
Yes. So, so there are various, technology solutions available. They call it isolated recovery environment. Whereas you identify the data that you backup, and then that backup is primarily based on need basis, pull basis, and you create logical air gap or physical air gap. Once the data is in the appliance, you scan for and then this is a simple solution. But air gap alone is not going to help in terms of enabling cyber resilience. When it comes to ransomware and malware, the whole operating model in terms of enabling a set of processes and people who are dedicated for handling these operations, they need to be completely segregation of duties between these two teams. We call them as cyber emergency response team. They have their own operations in terms of managing the data within Cyber Vault, and working on that works as another IT kind of things, where when it's needed, the entire enterprise IT ecosystem needs to be brought in for this particular environment, where you use this clean copy and bring it up, and when it is needed, you need to go for reconstructing the data based on the particular application, where it interacts with various other entities outside, whether it is regulators themselves in terms of your NEFT, RTGS, or UPI, NPCI. This kind of reconciliation you need to do and bring it up. So air gap, it's very simple to implement, and just having a data which is immutable in another place and free, something like that. But how you are going to use is the question in terms of cyber resilience. When apparently cyber resilience is actually part of overall operational resilience.
Thanks, Karun. There is a question on how does modern architectural framework support operational resilience? So I would put this in this manner. See, modern architectural frameworks, you have got nowadays all the modern engineering frameworks like Spring Boot, Go, Nest.js, which support these microservices-based development. You have got DevSecOps in place as a part of your pipelines. All these are there. See, what they bring in is a better efficiency in terms of the kind of overall visibility of what is happening as a part of your development operations. But they do support operational resilience as a part of but those practices have to be embedded as a part of your software, and that is where I called the engineering 101 discipline. You need to have those. See, there are tools. All these frameworks, etc., will give you those things. It is how much the bank is adopting. Are they adopting in the right manner, and are they doing or certifying, validating what they have done correctly? The examples which I just threw on the configuration drift, for example. There are ways today in AWS, for example, you could use autoscaler, or you could go with AWS Carpenter, say, for example. There are ways and means. If you ask me, AWS Carpenter is much more efficient when you talk of scalability. But again, have we configured it the right way? Are we putting the parameters into it the correct way, so that it is able to withstand any failures in case of any node drains, in case of any pod which needs to be cordoned off, etc., etc. So those are some of the areas wherein you would require governance. While these tools, modern frameworks will definitely help, but you will also equally need to have the governance layer as a part of the overall sustenance. And that is where typically the banks where ARBs are established, CCB control boards. These are the entities who within the bank who typically enforce, ask the right questions, look at it, whether they are implemented in the right manner, put up the right guidelines and practices so that everyone can adhere to, have those as a part of your checklist in terms of, and also the automation controls which need to be around it. I think that is where I would put the modern architectural frameworks. There is a question on IT operational resilience in view of the Digital Personal Protection Act 2023. Again, a very, I would say, it's a very important area when we talk of the Digital Personal Protection Act. See, typically, and that is also, as I said, IT operational resilience, if you look at it, is a function of not just performance, to test the whether I am able to recover from failure, etc. Even a smallest security breach or a PII, SPDI data getting compromised, that could also result in your IT operational resiliency failure. There are incidents, and the first chart itself, what I showed on the screen, it very clearly talked about some of the areas where regulators had imposed penalties to such kind of organizations, banks who have breached the kind of data, not putting the right controls and measures in terms of PII data classification, how need to take care of it, etc., etc. Now with these Digital Personal Protection Act coming in, these are even more strengthened. It encompasses now also the consents area as well, on how you do it, how you preserve it, who can consume it, the age for which the consent is stored within the a particular, when your application is asking for it, etc., etc. For what purpose? So it is, I would say, strengthening the kind of the guidelines which existed earlier. It is now also strengthening those, putting proper guardrails around it, so that the banks are aware of what needs to be done, to what extent it needs to be enforced, what areas typically need to be taken care as a part of guardrails. So yes, IT operational resilience encompasses that as well, the Digital Personal Protection Act. There is an interesting question on adopting new technologies and how to balance scale and resilience. See, this is always a chicken and egg story, I would say. Any new technology is always investment. But as I said, the question here is not that, okay, I am on a tech debt, I am sitting behind, do I need to really adopt a new technology, etc., etc. I am able to serve today all the customers. I do not have any zero incidents in the last 1-2 years, etc., etc. Problem is that when such a kind of an incident occurs, when your systems get compromised, that is where you realize, and therefore then you start investing and taking measures, etc. But it's too late because the damage is already done. If it is a customer facing application, nowadays with the social media and all those tweets and everything, it's visible, and therefore the brand reputation is also at a stake. So therefore the question, as I said, it needs to be asked rather than more of a compliance, more from a scale, etc. The question is the customer's trust. Are we putting the right controls in, and the control, so that we are able to ensure the customer's trust? I think that is the kind of question which we need to answer, and the lens which we need to use when dealing with operational resiliency. Of course, the criticality of application, I'm not saying that it needs to be done for each and every application, etc. There needs to be a prioritization, as I told. If you look at the 5-step approach which I had shown, prioritization needs to be done. What areas need to be looked at? How critical the application is? I think those are some of the classify those, have the right metrics in terms of the order of prioritization of those, and you can start embarking on. But yes, the journey needs to be started now. It needs to be embraced and not just looked at from a technology investment or a kind of just for scale or resilience. It is more to do with customer trust. There is a question which is posed on the observability. How does observability contribute to the resilience over traditional monitoring? And what are the critical metrics that indicate most potential resilience risks? So here, I think first we need to look at, if you recollect the second slide which I had shown, today or traditionally, how banks have been looking at the applications is being a heterogeneous landscape, multiple vendors, application owners are looking at their own stuff. Infra are looking at their own set of responsibilities, etc. So therefore, if you look at any kind of a resilience failure, it need not be that that application has gone wrong. The process, it could intersect across application, various layers of the technology infrastructure, other applications, your ecosystem partners, etc., till it is actually till you actually get obstructed by the hotspot in that entire process. So the observability has to be built today across the applications. You need to be able to correlate stuff from one application to another. For example, there could be a modern application which could give you all the observability metrics, whatever you know, right from the Kubernetes pods, how they are, what kind of max pods you're running, etc., to the point where it intersects the CBS, and therefore error could happen there. And so therefore your observability framework should not just encompass your modern engineered application, but also needs to look at the touch points with the core system, able to correlate with it, when the request was sent, what time it was received, where the latency hotspots are, what kind of failures are there, are those core applications giving or returning the right kind of error codes? I think these are the questions which need to earn. Therefore, the observability has to be built, taking into consideration the overall architecture. And that's where I would say this is how it is different from traditional monitoring. And if you recollect what I just mentioned, the RTB, which is run the bank, typically today, this is almost every bank is facing this problem, as I know from a practitioner's lens. Every application is looking at the observability controls, but as a whole, from a holistic lens, we tend to fail to look at the hotspots, and therefore we also ignore the observability metrics, what needs to be built in across the process at various layers. So I would say these are the areas where you need to put in terms of what are the critical metrics. Metrics are, I mean, you need to define it based on what kind of process it is, the criticality, and therefore what are the non-negotiable ones which you need to put in place, and the key ones which are helping you. See, the idea is not having a laundry list of metrics. Idea here is putting the right metrics in so that you're able to diagnose the problem quickly, you're able to recover from your failure quickly, you have a visibility and transparency into your process. So therefore, identification of the right metrics across the legs of transaction is going to be important. A principle which I can suggest, it is a guiding principle which helps you to look at typically what we called as LETS, wherein you need to look at latency, you need to look at error, you need to look at your throughputs, and you need to look at your saturations. Typically, in your transaction leg or journey across various applications, I think predominantly these 4 areas, and therefore the underlying metrics across those, when it does a handshake with other interfaces within the bank of internal or external applications, these are the 4 areas which you need to look at, and therefore the underlying metrics for those.
There's a question on IT operational resilience and cyber resilience. So simple, as I mentioned before, your operational resilience is a superset. Cyber resilience is going to be, one of those things in those 7 pillars what Paritosh was showing. With respect to your triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, cyber resilience will take care of it. But when it comes to the technology
We have been losing your voice.
platforms, availability, business continuity, disaster recovery, skilling the relevant people who are going to manage this entire ecosystem will all be the part of the superset.
Yeah.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, it's much better. Yeah, I think thanks for. I think the switch of the video, that was good. Yes, there is one question on the I think I can see one question asked on, apart from UAT pre-prod test, is there any other risk controls which can be implemented across COTS application? See, as I said, it is not about just UAT or pre-prod tests. I mean, I will give you a very classic example which we recently encountered. In most of the applications in the bank, I mean, Oracle is a known technology. The rack is a known technology. Typically, you have multiple nodes sitting. There are scenarios when suddenly one node could go off, and then you need to still ensure that your application is running. Now, if you look at this small problem, now as I said, there could be multiple areas which could be there for this underlying issue to have occurred. It could be a configuration issue. It could be a infra issue. It could be a issue related to backup which is attached to it, etc., etc. Now, as I said, resilience has to be looked at from various lenses. A, how you have architected the solution, how you have designed it, how you have put the validation controls against it, and it's not necessarily UAT, because UAT predominantly would test your functional scenarios. A pre-prod test could probably test some of the scenarios. Yes, load testing, etc., could be done there. But some of these scenarios wherein, whilst you are, say, for example, a load test is running and your Oracle rack node going down, what is the behavior of that on your application? That is a question to be asked. And that is not where just a pre-prod test or a UAT. I mean, you need to have a well-engineered approach and a solution in place. You need to be able to run certain chaos engineering tests to identify what is the root cause of the problem, where the problem is, and also in the first place to simulate the problem, because simulation is also very important. So there are various treatments, but it all comes under the kind of resilience engineering. So it is not just a typical test which need to be put in order to validate the controls. It is encompassing the complete life cycle, and therefore the kind of validation measures which you need to put in each and every leg of the development life cycle. There is a question which is on the zero trust. How is it in the optional or the operational resiliency? I believe I believe the word is operational there. See, zero trust, I would say, is today it's very important. There are organizations and banks who have been adopting this. And if you look at the ZTNA, I think this is fundamentally, if you are using the security best practices, nowadays what is being followed is secure by design. And therefore, this is one of the concepts which is embedded as a part of the overall secure application lifecycle. And zero trust concept is on that. Now, the levels of or the treatment which needs to be given, that could be different, adopted by different organizations. There are multiple ways to take care, multiple tools, technologies, process which can be put in place, but the sophistication could also vary. For example, there are banks which I've seen who have adopted or are in the process of adopting micro-segmentation controls for securing some of their traffic flows and ensuring to zero trust network access kind of a policies. They have segregated their flows when it comes to internal, external ecosystem partners, their PCI DSS systems, how you are able to segregate those traffics, and in event of any such incident, how quickly you are able to isolate that path. So all that is now. So the level of sophistication, I would say, has increased over the last 12 to 18 months. That is how I would put it. There has been a question. Can share some input for the differentiate IT operations abilities. So I think we have already covered that. Alerts, I think we have spoken about. Yes, I think it's a good question. I think several times critical alerts they get drowned or lost in huge volumes. Very true. And I have myself witnessed being a practitioner. I've seen one of the banks having put the best of best tools in place, measuring almost like 5,000 odd metrics. Their on-ground support operations team was having no clue of having all those alerts and what to do of those alerts and resolutions against those. So while these tools now have got a lot of AI built-in things, they discover and put a laundry list of metrics. But yes, I mean, you could get bogged down and get drowned with those. And therefore, as I said, when you look at it predominantly, as I said, the guidance here is look at those 4 areas which I mentioned in terms of the latency, error, throughput, saturation. Predominantly these 4 areas, if you intersect in your process or you imbibe in your process, whether to do with handshakes with other application, and therefore the underlying metrics you can identify against these 4 areas, and those are the some things which you need to look at. This also, I think you would also need certain rules so that you don't keep hogging alerts and you get say for example, some system is down and you get thousands of alerts. So you need to put in the right ITSM controls in place so that the alerts are visible once till action is taken. You are not flooded with those, and once you have taken a treatment, you are taking measures to off the alert so that you don't get again and someone has done a treatment on that alert. Yeah, I think we are almost on the top of the hour. Maybe for any questions which I have missed, we can definitely respond offline given the paucity of time. But yes, I think I have tried my best to answer most of the questions which have been put up on the chat.
If any question is missed, I think you can, we'll send you the list of questions. You can, otherwise, no, you can give the responses in detail. We'll circulate to the members along with the presentation also.
That will be
Thank
helpful.
you. Thank you, Paritosh, and thank you, Mr. Karun, for doing excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Srinivas.
Thank you, Srinivas. Thank you.